Hello everybody and welcome to Tech Uploaded. I'm Chris and today I'm going to be taking a look at the UEFI BIOS on the Maximus VII Hero Z97 motherboard. Alright, full disclosure, there are so many options in this motherboard that it's absolutely staggering. I actually don't know what a majority of them are, so if you're an extreme overclocker and you love to squeeze every last bit of power you can out of your CPU and your memory, and you love to go in and tweak every setting that you can possibly think of, I have no doubt in my mind that you are going to love this motherboard. The BIOS has so many features and so many options that if I knew what they all did, I would be spending hours going through all of them. So I'm going to take a look at the BIOS, I'm going to take a look at AI Suite 3, see how the auto overclocking tools work, and just kind of give you a general overview of what you can expect out of the interface and the user experience with the Maximus VII Hero. So it's kind of a long video, so let's get to it. Alright, so here we are. This is the landing page when you go into the UEFI BIOS utility for the Maximus VII Hero Z97 board. And you can see right off the bat, one of the things this board does versus the last Z87 board I had prior to having an ROG board is it dumps you immediately into advanced mode instead of taking you into basic mode and having to jump over to advanced, because it assumes you're an advanced user if you bought this board and you're going to be doing some tweaking. So it drops you right into the screen with pretty much the majority of what you're actually going to need right off the bat. So it's showing you all of the information about how your system is set currently. So right now I'm on a 4.2 gigahertz overclock, so just for the sake of taking a look at everything at factory, we'll go ahead and restore the defaults here as we go through this. So 4770K, 3.9 on the turbo mode frequency. And then it does show you where your DRAM is currently, which is the XMP profile is not set, so 1333. And then everything else, including your cache frequency, your chip's actual frequency, and then the CPU graphics frequency. And then over on the right-hand side is all the other information that you might want to look at. So your stock, your base clock, your temps, and then information about your memory, which is still showing the XMP there, as well as your voltages. Now, if you don't do anything else, when you first go into your BIOS, what you're going to want to do when you put in your memories, you're going to want to switch over to XMP. And that's going to apply the profile that's set to your memory, how you actually bought it. So in this case, I'm using ADATA 1866 memory, so it's going to drop in that 1866 overclock on it. Double check your timings. I mean, really, this should be just fine, but make sure you didn't get swindled and everything is where it should be. Then here's where you kind of dump into if you want to start doing some real tweaking here. You can start playing around with your CPU strap and all of your other goods. I don't really ever mess around with any of these. When I do an overclock, the only thing I ever change is the ratio. I don't mess with doing any kind of a base clock, overclock. I just feel like you don't really need to anymore in this day and age unless you're really pushing things, which some people do, and it's fine. And speaking of pushing things, you have the option of doing on your ratio either syncing all cores, which is the fast and easy way, or if you really want to get the most out of your chip that you can actually do it on a per core basis, which is kind of nice because a lot of times you'll be able to get a higher overclock out of some of the cores than you will the others. And if you're lucky, core 1 and 2 will maybe do 4.6 without any problem at a particular voltage, but maybe core 3 and 4 can only do 4.5, so you can do 4.6 if you're in 1 and 2 core mode, and then when you jump into the other cores, then you'll go to 4.5. So just a way to squeak a little bit of extra performance out of your CPU if you need to do that. All right, then continuing down here, you've got all of your different voltage settings here, your cache ratios, which you might need to set, your DRAM frequency, which if you're going to be overclocking, this is where you'll do it. I can go up to 2400 actually on this, on mine, if I want to, but I find the speed difference really isn't that great between the two, so I just leave it at its stock XMP to keep everything nice and stable. CPU level up, you can go in here and you can tell it if you want to do 4.2, 4.4, or 4.6, and it'll attempt to get you there automatically. Speaking of overclocking your RAM, if you're going to do that, this is the screen you'll need to go into, and you'll need to set your XMP, or not your XMP, but your timings based on how far you overclock it. So I believe I have to go to like 11, 13, 13, 34, 35, I think, when I go up to 2400. So, it really just depends. The easiest way to actually figure that out, if you're going to overclock your memory, if the manufacturer sells an overclock version of that memory, check and see what the timings are in the faster version of it. So, for example, the ADATA, all I had to do was look at the 2400 megahertz ADATA that they sell, and then just copy those timings into here. Boom, overclock. And then here you start getting into things that I never actually go into or do anything with. You've got all of this for your GPU DIMM, your DigiPower Plus. Now this you probably will need to go into if you're pushing your overclock, 4.6, 4.8, trying to get to 5. If you're going to really start pushing things, you may need to jump out of auto mode and start going into here and messing around with things. You'll notice though, what's nice about this BIOS is it does explain in most cases at the bottom kind of a general idea of what you're doing, what you're sitting on, and what that function does. So that's actually nice. You can read it and kind of learn a little bit going through that way. And then here's the Tweaker's Paradise. A little bothered that there's not a space between Tweakers and Paradise, but I guess, you know what, I bet in a future BIOS update revision, someone notices that and puts the space in there. But again, here, this is, you know, it's exactly what it is. It's the Tweaker's Paradise. If you need to change things around, this is where you'll need to do it. I've seen a lot of posts online for overclocking stating that this initial base clock frequency, a lot of times, sometimes you need to mess with that, as well as your initial voltages. So, you know, some of the things may be in there that you need to mess around with, as well as your internal CPU power management. Again, a lot of times you have to enable or disable certain things in here. The higher your overclock gets, the more stuff that you might need, you know, as far as the automatic speed and tuning goes, you may need to start disabling those, or it will introduce instability into your overclock. So there's plenty of options in order to be able to tackle that. All right, then here's the important part. Pretty much any overclock you do, you're going to need to play with your CPU core voltage. I have found actually with my chip, I can go up to 4.4 and leave this on auto, and it will just put an adaptive voltage in place and does a pretty good job with that actually. And I don't have to go in here and change this. But if you wanted to do something like a manual or an offset mode, this is where you would actually go in and you would set it, and then you would type in what the override frequency or voltage that you want to use is going to be, depending on what frequency and clock or ratio that you're using. So, you know, the higher you go, the more voltage you're going to need. You get above 1.3, you better have some good cooling. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that on auto for now, and then you can also set your cache voltage and, you know, all of your other voltages in here. And let me get down to the other one that's really going to matter. If you're overclocking your memory, you'll need to bump your DRAM voltage up a bit. For example, when I'd go to 2400 on mine, I do need to go from 1.5 to 1.55 in order to get it stable in all of my memory tests. So a little bit of a bump to that. Do be careful with your DRAM voltages though, because a lot of times memory does not have any kind of a safety built in, and it will overclock or overheat if you're overclocking it too far and dumping too much voltage into it, and actually cause the memory to fail. So use a little bit of common sense on that one. And scrolling down even more, you know, base clock recovery. This is nice to leave on. If your overclock fails and it pings enough times on a failed boot, it will just dump everything back. So it'll go back to 100 megahertz in order for you to get back into the BIOS and get a boot going again. So that's everything it dumps you into in the Extreme Tweaker right off the bat. You can say favorites, and if you do, this is where they go. But jumping over to main, this is kind of the quick overview of what you have. So it gives you your BIOS revision, your BIOS date, and everything like that. Obviously, I'm running whatever the one was out of the factory, because I got this board on the day it was released. So I kind of know whatever the first BIOS was for this board is the one I'm running. But if you need to check for some kind of you know, most of the time when you would actually update is if you're having some kind of a stability issue, or if new processors have been introduced. I imagine when Broadwell hits, there'll probably be a BIOS update that ASUS would recommend that you apply just for that chipset compliance. Jumping over to advanced, this is where you could pretty much spend a couple of days going through everything. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time in here. If you do have something that you want to know, if you have a question, if a certain feature is in here, just ask me and I'll dig in here and look for you. But, you know, I'll jump through these menus real quick here. As you can see, lots and lots of different options here for your CPU. Your PCH is in here. Your storage configuration you probably will want to go into, especially the first time you actually boot the system before you do any kind of a Windows install or anything. You'll want to head into here and make sure that HCI is on, unless you've got a RAID set up. If you're doing RAID, this is where you would go in to actually enable that. And then what you're going to want to do is make sure that all of your hard drives are actually here. So I can check and I see, yes, my SSD is here, my 2 terabyte drive is here, my 1 terabyte drive is here. So both Seagates and my Crucial are accounted for and actually plugged into the SATA ports that I wanted them to be. So that's a good thing to check. System agent configuration, you can kind of dump into here if you need to change anything in here, which I've never had to do. Your USB configuration, another menu you might need to go in here if you're having issues with some kind of a USB device or something like that. You can actually go in here and make some different settings in here. You also have single port control, so you can enable or disable your USB ports one by one. So if for whatever reason you need to disable one of your ports, this is where you'll go in to do that. Platform miscellaneous. So again, I have no idea what pretty much any of this stuff is in here or why I would need to be in here messing with it, but I suppose this is something maybe if you're doing a really advanced SLI configuration, you have kind of a more advanced piece of hardware, you might need to start digging around in some of these areas. This is all of your onboard, so if you want to disable your onboard audio, that's where to do it. Your It has media storage controllers in here for the 2 extra SATA 6 ports that are actually on the board. So if you wanted to disable that or change some settings, you'd go in there and do that here, as well as your LAN controller. If for whatever reason you needed to disable the Intel onboard LAN, that's where you find that. APM configuration, network stack, ROG effects. So the board has some lighting on it that lights up the little piece around where the sound card is, and that actually bleeds through the back of the board, and then it actually does light up that what normally would have been the Southbridge heatsink, but the heatsink that's over the Z97, that is where you can turn that on or off. So if that bling bothers you, you can turn it off in there. All right, now over in monitor, this is pretty much the same where it was before on the previous gen boards that I've used, and that this is an exclusive to just ROG. The Q-fan tuning is kind of new. I've seen it before on older boards, but supposedly it's a little bit more advanced now. You can actually do this, and it's going to go through and tune your fans automatically for you if you wanted to do that. And I would imagine what this is going to do is maybe figure out which fans are PWM and which ones aren't, and if that's the case, that would be pretty darn handy, because you'll need to know that for another menu that we'll get into. You've got your voltage monitor if you need to keep an eye on any of that stuff. Temperature monitor is always nice to have in case you're worried something may be getting a little too warm. Fan speed monitor, that's pretty straightforward. And fan speed control, this is kind of the old school way of controlling the speed on your fans. So you can go in here, and this is where you would select if you've got PWM or DC. This is kind of the old school fan controller window that you would go into in the old days. Way back in the day, you'd go in here and change everything, and then kind of tell it, what kind of fan it is, what's going on, what sensors, all that good stuff. But you don't really need to worry about that on this one, because you'll see in a minute there's a fancy version of that on this board. Then, of course, here's all of your different boot options. So if you're doing something kind of squirrely with your boot, you can go in here and change these things around if you need to. You got your boot option priorities. Back in the day when you used to have to really worry about this, you can go in here and switch these around if you need to for whatever reason. For example, if you need to make your USB your boot priority and you don't want to do the manual boot selector, you can go in here and just permanently change it. And then here's your tools. So you've got your Easy Flash 2 utility, your secure erase. Apparently this is for SSDs, and it'll actually go through and wipe your SSD securely and actually take it back to where it was right out of the box, supposedly. Your graphics card information is in here, as well as your overclocking profiles. So if you're going to save OC profiles, this is where you would find them in here. Your SPD information. This is for your RAM. So if you really want to dig into detail on each one of your different RAM DIMMs, this is where you would go. You can see I don't have one in A1 or B1. I've got them in A2 and B2. And then if you do have the ROGOC panel, this is where you would go in and set your options there. And then, to get out the mouse for this one, you can put in different favorites in here. So you can go in and do all kinds of favorite settings in here if you want to. All of the menu options, basically, everything you can do in the board in that extreme tweaker is also in here as well. So this is, you can really dig into some detail here and get things exactly how you want them, and then kind of just set shortcuts within here. So if you change things a lot or you have profiles that you're really fond of, it's kind of a nice tool to have. Now here's the thing that's really cool. This is the Q fan control. This one, I love this. This is great. So before you used to have to kind of install the AI suite if you really wanted to dig into a lot of detail on your fan curves and things like that. But now you can just go in here and do it right in here. So you select, where you got your chassis fans and whether they're PWM or DC power. So, basically 3-pin or 4-pin. And you can change them as you need to. And when you do actually set these, if you set them correctly, you'll hear things quiet down quite a bit in your system. So for example, my chassis fan 4-pin, that is 2 fans that are both PWM. When I switched that over from DC to PWM, things got real quiet real fast because you see the curve drop down here. If you want to set things manually, you do have the option to do that, so you can kind of draw your curve however you want that curve to be. So you can up and down, move things over. Well, I guess you can't. Can I move it this way? Nope. Can I put a new point in? Yeah, it doesn't look like it. All right, but you have got full speed, turbo, which is going to be more aggressive, and then silent and standard. So not a huge difference between all of those. One of the reasons you might want to change this, for example, with the PWM fans I have in here, you'll notice that the threshold that it finds is just south of 70, where it starts to really kick up the fans. It's kind of annoying because that happens to be when I'm under load where my CPU likes to sit, so it jumps between 65 and 75. What that does is it actually causes my fans to kind of go whoom, whoom, and wind up and spin down a lot, because PWM fans can adjust on the fly, and it's kind of annoying. It's actually distracting. So what I do is I actually set this to be a little bit more aggressive on the fan most of the time, so that it's not winding up and spinning down quite as much, because it's less noticeable when it's just at a constant volume than when it's actually spinning up and spinning down all the time. So that's pretty darn handy to have that in there. Then this is the easy tuning wizard. Now I've run through this before, and I'm not going to run it again, but I will step through it to the point where you'd actually hit go. Basically, you just tell it, all right, is this just like email, word processing, and whatnot, or are you going to be gaming and editing? All right, cool. Well, we're going to do that because it's, come on, it's 4770K. Then you tell it, well, how cool is the computer? How far can it push it based on what kind of water cooling solution or maybe air cooler that you have? So, straightforward. If you're using the stock cooler, that's what you'd keep selected. If you're using something like a Noctua, you'd select tower cooler. If you're doing water cooling like I am, you'd select that. And then it kind of gives you an estimation for how much it's going to overclock things. So it's saying it's going to boost my CPU by 31 and my DRAM by 43. When I ran it, it did nothing for the RAM. However, it took the CPU up to 4.5. But the second I got into Windows and ran a stress test at that overclock, failed immediately. So I can't really recommend this, too much. You're better off just doing it by yourself. At least that's my experience on this board. And then if you are going to do any kind of RAID information, this is where you'd go in. If you're going to do a RAID setup, you can, instead of doing it back in the Extreme Tweaker, you can just do it in here, and it'll step you through it in a little bit more of a friendly graphical interface, but I'm not going to do that. One thing I have found, it's not the most responsive when you're using the mouse as far as clicking on things, which is kind of annoying. You can put quick notes in here, so I guess that's nice. And then it kind of gives you a breakdown of all of your different hotkeys that you can set within here. So a lot of different stuff in here, a lot of options. Like I said, I could go for an hour if I actually wanted to look up what every single one of these things does. But boy, there's a lot of options in here for being able to tweak your system. ASUS pretty much covered every base that I can think of as far as what you would want to do, which makes sense because they, tout how advanced the cooling and chokes and MOSFETs and things are on this board for being able to take massive amounts of power and keep your system stable. You've got to have a way to set those things. You've got to have a way to control them, and that's where you can. You can do it right within here. So pretty cool. Lots of options. Probably pretty overwhelming for the person just getting into it. And I believe you can actually force it back into easy mode. All right, here's easy mode. So if you found the other screen to be a little bit too intense, you can jump in here. One thing I really like about this is it shows all my little fans spinning. So it's showing my CPU fan optional, chassis 2 and chassis 4. So that's pretty cool. So essentially what that is I've got my rear fan is on a chassis fan header. My front fan, 2 fans are on another one. I believe they're on 4. CPU fan, which is the Noctua fans, is on the actual CPU fan header. And then optional fan is the pump for my H105. And you see I still have these 2 available. Rapid storage technology on or off, so you can enable or disable that here. And then here you go. Here is the temperature. So I guess this is keeping a profile history of the temperature of the CPU itself. It shows my voltage, motherboard temperature, and easy system tuning. So you can do ASUS optimal. You can do normal. You can do power saving. So there's all your different options there. And then here's your boot priority. So this is the real quick way to switch your boot priority if you don't want to dig into the advanced menu. And then here is, of course, boot menu. So if you wanted to just boot from something one time, you go in here and just select it within here and it'll boot from that device. So for example, if you're doing a Windows install off a USB, but you already have Windows on the computer, so it's going to take that as the priority the first time, you can just go in here and say, I'm going to hit F8 and just say boot from the flash, and it'll do it there. That's the easiest way to do it. So yeah, there you go. Still even a lot of stuff within easy mode. A lot of things you can do in here. You can set your XMP profile within here, which is really nice. So kudos to them for making that easy to do. And then if you're going to do your manual fan tuning, look at that, jumps you right into Q fan. So a lot of people may not even, if you're not going to do an overclock on your CPU, and maybe you just want to go in here and set this ASUS optimal, you can do that. So let's go ahead and set ASUS optimal and see what it does when I boot into Windows. All right, then when you go to exit, it's showing that I'm actually taking the 4.2 gigahertz overclock away. I'm putting my XMP profile in place, And then set a configuration mode. It's showing that I moved over to RAID, which I did not. So I want to double check that that is actually not the case. So let me go back into advanced mode here. And I'm going to go to advanced storage. Yep, saved it on RAID. So switch that back. That's why that exit menu is really nice, because it shows you want to pay attention to that. Make sure that you're not switching something you didn't want to. So let me go back to easy mode here, and now I'm going to hit save and exit, and everything looks correct. It switched to my 2 fans to PWM, which is good. And I'm going to hit OK and reboot. All right, so I'm back into Windows 8.1, and I will say first off, hitting that like extreme profile or whatever on within the BIOS was not a good idea. That actually just applied a 4.6 gigahertz overclock, and the computer was actually so unstable it wouldn't even start booting Windows. It errored out immediately to a blue screen. This 4770K that I have is a really bad overclocking chip. It requires an extreme amount of voltage to get to 4.6. To the point where the fans are almost at full speed all the time in order to keep the computer cooled down, and introducing any kind of a real load at 4.6 overheats the chip. So that being said, I took everything back to factory, and we'll go in here and we'll pull up AI Suite 3. So when you click on that, you have 2 options to get into AI Suite. You can do the quick access down here in this little panel that's always up. You can do your fan controls, your little messaging center, or you can set, if you want your computer to be running normally, or you're on power saving or away mode. So when you go in here, you'll see your CPU speed boost and all that different stuff. So you can see right here, we're just at the standard stock. We have 0% CPU speed boost, 3.9 turbo, and your fan expert hasn't been set yet. So one of the first things you're going to want to do when you're in here, actually, the nice thing about AI Suite more than anything else, in my opinion, is fan expert. So you want to run that the very first thing that you do. Obviously, one of the nice things about this software is along the bottom, you do get kind of a rundown of what's happening on everything. So it'll show you all the different speeds of your fans, your temperatures real quick, your voltages that you're drawing, and then the frequency that you're currently running at. And then if you click up here in the upper right, this is where you kind of jump through all the different things. So you can turn on push notifications for things like if one of your fans stops working or something like that, you can actually push that information to your phone, and it'll tell you, hey, fan stopped working. Probably do something about that. USB Charger Plus, that'll let you feed more voltage to specific USB ports to charge things faster. You have the flashback tool. You have your system information. You've got the easy update for your software and your BIOS. USB Boost 3. This is actually really handy, and it does work decently well. I've used it before on a couple of external Western digitals, and things that are supported, it will actually show, and things that are not will not show up in here. So it just depends on what your device actually supports. Some devices support Boost 3, and some don't. So we'll go back here to the Dual Intelligent Processors 5, and now what we'll do at this point is we'll go ahead and start doing the 5-way optimization. So set your fan locations. You can go into the advanced settings down here, and you'll notice on here, it's basically saying CPU level up, what speed do you want to do the CPU, 424446. This is very similar to what you had in the CPU level up in the BIOS. Then it's going to actually set your EPU, configure max CPU power. We'll go ahead and check that just for fun. And then we have those 2 things bottom checked for DigiPlus, which it looks like you cannot uncheck. So, all right, let's go ahead and do a 4.4 overclock on this system and see if we can get stable at that and see what kind of temperatures we get. So what I'll go ahead and do is I'm going to let this run now. Then when we come back, see if it's stable, and then play around with KeyBot a little bit. To do that, I actually have to crack open the side of the computer and physically press the KeyBot button on the motherboard, it looks like. All right, so it is done doing its optimization. So what it actually did was it overclocked the CPU. It also did the Fan Expert 3 automatically. So one thing to note is you would think Fan Expert 3 maybe would try to go through and detect which fans are PWM and which ones aren't, but it looks like it didn't do that because this fan shouldn't be having this kind of fan curve. So my guess is this one is set for DC when it should be on PWM. So I would need to go through and do that in the BIOS more than likely, but it did get it correct on the header 4, which is the 2 Noctua fans on the front, as well as getting the CPU fan right. So make sure you have that set right in the BIOS, I guess, before you go through and do this, because it's not smart enough to actually figure that one out automatically for you. You need to set that manually. And then the CPU did 44 on all 4 cores. You will note, it says in here, when you run a third-party stress test, such as 8064 Prime 95 OCCT, the core voltage may exceed the adaptive V-core voltage. This may result or may reduce the CPU frequency due to high temperatures. So basically, if you want to run third-party stress test, manually do your vCore. So essentially what it's saying is don't use adaptive voltage if you're going to run Prime 95 or something like that. Well, go ahead and do that anyway, even though it said not to, just to take a look at just how far it's going to bump the core voltage. Because I've done this before. I've let it actually switch me over to adaptive when it wasn't supposed to, and man, did it bump that vCore. So we'll go ahead and close out of that. We'll take a look at what it's done here now. So the fan expert, like I said, what you want to do, you definitely want to run this the first time, like I said before, when you get a system, just to get your fans nice and quiet. But again, I need to go through because this one is telling me, that's not right, that back fan. But the front fans are good, so you can go in here and you can actually set your curves if you want to. You can also do fan auto stop, so it actually shut the fan off when it's below a certain temperature, so you can click on that, and those fans will just get quiet unless the system has enough of a load on it to cause them to have to boot or spin back up again. So that's kind of nice. So there you go. The next thing now is to kind of take a look at temperatures when I introduce a load. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to jump right into a video export. Before I do that, though, I'm going to actually stop and start the recording again because I have a sneaking suspicion the system is going to become unstable. All right, so what I'll go ahead and do is I'll export the most recent thing I did here, and we'll see what happens when we introduce the load with the video export. So, wow, this resolution, all right. Not used to having my monitor at the 1920 by 1080. All right, so we'll just dump this to the desktop, which is where it's set, and we'll hit export and see what happens here. See if we stay stable. All right, the fans are definitely kicking in. Voltage is at 1.248 with a 92% load, and temperatures are staying in the 70s. So that's not bad. And we are running at 4.4. Well, peaking at 80. One thing with my chip, you'll note, Core 1 gets a lot hotter than Core 4 all the time. And that's just the lovely engineering on the Haswell chips. Good job, Intel, on that heat spreader application there and the thermal paste you used. Clearly, it's nice and even. All right, so we're letting this go 81 degrees. So core voltage is not concerning at all. 1.248 I am perfectly fine with using an H105 water cooler. And as you can see, the H105 it's keeping up just fine. It is doing that thing though that I was complaining about earlier, where it's kind of going vroom, vroom on the fan. So again, that's a fan curve setting I need to change just to keep it a little more consistent because that's kind of annoying. But yeah, I like to run this Premiere Pro test because I found from using the system that this actually introduces the most consistent steady load to the CPU. Not the GPU, but the CPU of anything that I actually do. It keeps it in the 90s most of the time through the course, the time of the export. So it's a nice real world test to run, something that's not Prime 95 or a synthetic benchmark. This is what I use the computer more than anything else for. So this is actually really nice to be able to run this. All right, well, it's almost done with the export, and temperatures are in a very nice place. As a matter of fact, they're actually doing pretty well. Obviously, these are temperatures in Celsius, but the temperature outside in Fahrenheit is 77, and all the windows are open in the house right now, so it's not cool by any means in here. I'd say it's probably about 75 or 76 degrees, if not a little bit warmer in the room I'm actually running this test in, so that's not bad to be seeing those kind of temperatures, especially the 1.25 core volt. It looks like the maximum that I hit on Core 1 was 84, and the maximum I hit on Core 4 was 76, so that's quite a difference between the two, about 8 degrees. All right, so the system, I would say, test is being stable here at this point. I can go ahead and close this. Whenever I use that test with an overclock, that's always the one that introduces system instability. I can run Prime 95, and Prime 95 will run stable for an hour, and then I will run an export from Premiere, boom, blue screen. So if it's going to blue screen, it almost always does it in that. So now I'm going to go ahead and actually run Prime 95 just to kind of show what happens when you introduce the kind of benchmark that ASUS says not to do when you're using adaptive voltage. All right, dun dun dun, stress test. Let's do in-place large FFTs because this really pushes things hard and see what happens. So we are jumping up to 1.335 on the voltage. This is why it recommends not doing this with adaptive voltage. And it did say in the little warning, oh, hey, we might drop your speed a little bit because the core voltage might go too high. I don't see it dropping my speed. It's just, it's grabbing both cheeks and hanging on and just letting it fly at 1.335. So you can see hitting 97. We're getting close to the TJ Maxx, but to be fair, our little buddy's holding its own. It's staying below 100. So we're definitely pushing the H105, especially in this room being kind of hot, to see how well it can do. But, you know, I have to say, considering how high that voltage is, the fact that I actually haven't maxed out my temperature on the chip yet, not bad. But this is really a clear indication of the bad thermal paste application within the chips, because you can see there's a 10-degree difference between Core 1 and Core 4. As a matter of fact, there is a 12-degree difference between Core 2 and Core 4. So it's very interesting looking at it this way. But we are pulling logs now for the thermal status on 3 out of the 4. However, we haven't hit a temperature yet that it considers to be dangerous. It's just kind of saying, you're getting kind of close. You might want to back off of that a little bit. But I just wanted to show this as a demonstration for if you're using adaptive voltage, why you shouldn't run a test like this. You saw what happened when I ran Premiere. That was pulling almost 100% load, 90 to 95%. And it was doing it at 4.4, and the temperatures didn't get anywhere near this high. The core voltage didn't get anywhere near this high. So this is just a test meant to stress the chip. It's meant to do this. So don't use core or adaptive voltage if you're into running these kind of things and kind of trying to flex your muscle and say, look what I did. As soon as I stop running it, everything's fine. Temperatures drop right back down to where they should be. Core voltage drops right back down to where it should be. So if you want to do an automatic overclock, it's perfectly fine. Just know that you shouldn't run tests like that because you are going to pull some serious voltage. That was something I didn't know that my system actually did one time, and I thought I was using an offset and did switch to adaptive, and I ran Prime 95. I was like, whoa! So be aware of that. So now the last thing to do is actually go in and start messing around with KeyBot. So I've got to open up the case to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. All right, I just hit the KeyBot button, and it lit up, but I don't know what that means. Okay, guys, I hit the KeyBot button, and the light on the motherboard is illuminated, but I'm not seeing anything happen yet. So, yeah, not really sure how that worked. I might have to do some research here. Okay, so I hit the KeyBot button. KeyBot light came on. Nothing came up on the screen. So I checked on the ASUS website to see if maybe it was a separate piece of software, something that wasn't included with the AI suite. Didn't see it in there. Went into the BIOS, hit the button on and off again. Nothing came up. So I have no clue how to actually initiate KeyBot. So I would love to show it to you, but I don't know how to get it to come up. So I don't know how to turn on that feature. If you know how to get KeyBot to come up, leave a comment, please. I'd love to know. I'd love to show it to you, but I can't because I can't figure it out. Maybe I'm just missing something. So yeah, here I am back at the Dual Intelligent 5 processors. It does show the 19% speed boost at 4.4 gigahertz, as well as a quick access to my EPU and my turbo app you can actually turn on. That will overclock the system for just individual applications. So say I wanted the computer to run at 3.5, unless I was in Premiere Pro and then I wanted to run at 4.4, you can kind of have it automatically apply the overclock for just those applications by going that route if you wanted to do that. And then, of course, your Fan Expert 3 settings are in there as well if you want to tweak your curve, which I will need to do. But yeah, there you go. There's an overview of AI Suite 3. All right, so there you have it. Kind of a rundown there of everything and maybe some things you didn't want to know about the new features of the Z87 boards, particular the ROG board, since this was a Maximus VII Hero, but a lot of the stuff should carry through to the other ASUS boards and other Z97 boards as a whole, just a little bit different in the way that it looks and how each manufacturer decides to set up their BIOS and their software within Windows. But a lot of flexibility there. Lots that you can do. Really interesting, the different auto overclocks that you can achieve based on how you do it and what software you use. It was interesting that I wasn't able to get the system stable doing the kind of fancy auto overtune that was built into the BIOS, but going through and just doing it, the auto overclock by just setting kind of an auto overclock, setting my multiplier and just leaving everything else on auto. That seemed to work just fine for the most part up to reasonable levels. So again, lots of flexibility. If you found this video helpful, please go ahead and click on that subscribe button. Go and follow me on Twitter over at Tech Uploaded. And you know the drill. Don't be a stranger. Check back soon.